I've been working with Clean Water since September of 2010, helping task forces work on all kinds of outreach, strategic outreach plans. I was the lead organizer on the Neighbor to Neighbor Energy Challenge, which, if you're not familiar with it, is where Clean Water received a grant to help task forces in different towns throughout the state sign people up for home energy solutions. So we have a lot of lessons learned. It was a pilot. We made a lot of mistakes. And I'm going to kind of go through what it is we wish we knew before we began that campaign. Let me dive into that. So tonight, what we'll do is talk a little bit about how Neighbor to Neighbor structured the outreach approach and some of our lessons learned in that. And then what are the 5 takeaways we wish we had known before we began our outreach in these communities. And then just some stories from real-life communities that you will be very familiar with. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to structure and manage your multi-touch campaign, and then how to apply these things to your own work. Okay, let's dive in. So Neighbor to Neighbor, we actually took what we called a 6-point approach, which then kind of evolved into a 7-point approach, to systematically and strategically reaching out to community groups and different segments of each community. And one of the things we found is that no one community is built the same as another. And we discovered that sometimes, where perhaps in Weston they have a warm-up fund, and that was a really great way to drive sign-ups for home energy solutions and upgrades, it may not have worked well in a town like Lebanon, where not that many people used the fuel assistance program there. So there's nothing cookie-cutter about this. This is, you pick and choose what works well for you and in your community. And you know your community's best. You've lived there, you work there. You know what's going to work in your community and what's not, or what is more likely to work than others. And that is one of the things we learned is we sometimes took an approach and really tried to force it and make it work in that community, and it just didn't always do that. So don't beat yourself up if you really just feel like you don't have businesses in your community. That's okay. Some towns don't have that, but they have a really great, strong, safe community. So one of the things that we did in each of these segments is we went through and said, looked at each of these segments as their own little community within a community. And who are the opinion leaders in each of these communities, both groups and individuals. And what we did is we wanted to really create this multi-touch approach. So we were trying to have different segments so people saw us in many different segments of their life, where they were kind of getting a sense that they saw us everywhere and they had to sign up. They were curious about who we were and what we were out doing because they just saw us everywhere. That's kind of the approach you want to take in your community. Now this can be applied to, I'm going to be mostly talking about home energy solutions and energy upgrades, which include insulation, HVAC, that sort of thing. But this can be applied to clean energy options, signups, all the way up through solar and a solar campaign. And frankly, it can be applied to pretty much anything you're trying to sign people up for. So what we did is we took this segment and we went through our list, or our town, and we came up with kind of what we called a strategic outreach plan, which was really just a glorified contact list. And we broke everything down into the segments, and we said, town. Everything in town is the mayor, everything you would find at town hall, or taxpayer dollars go to funding that. And from there, we usually sat with our energy task forces in each of these communities or some sort of similar group. And we went through with them, and they came up with a contact. And then from there, the group decided who was the most appropriate person to contact that individual. So if you happen to be neighbors with the mayor, it makes more sense for the chair of the task force to do that than someone who is new to town, perhaps. So we went through and really thought about who was strategic in that. Now, to be honest, we did have groups where They didn't know anyone in town. They didn't know what was going to work. Especially in some of the larger towns, that can be a bit of a struggle, not necessarily knowing your community that well. So that is one thing that we did do incorrectly and did struggle with neighbor to neighbor, and it's definitely one of our lessons learned, is that sometimes the volunteers around the table aren't the best people, and sometimes it's all going to be cold outreach. And that means cold outreach means when you don't know anyone and it's not been prompted, that you're just giving people a call, unsolicited. Okay. So this is something you can do to structure your outreach in your own communities, and I'm going to email this blank one of these around to everyone so that you can use them if you'd like in your own community. So some of the things before we dive into the strategic outreach plan that you want to think about is, what are your outreach goals? So again, like I said, it can be everything from clean energy option signups, fuel conversions, solar, HES, you name it, it can be in there. And I saw in your answers to your questions from the group that we have a lot of solar/solarized interest. We have a few people interested in running home energy solutions campaigns. And we have a few people interested in running media-based campaigns, which is pretty exciting. So all of these things all these types of campaigns can be done by structuring how you're going to reach out to people and which groups you're going to reach out to. And then you're going to think through who your top influencers in each of those segments of your community. And again, influencers can be a whole group of people, so it can be, the biggest church with the biggest congregation, or it can be an individual. It can be that guy who is at every event in town, who's lived there forever and knows everyone, and people really respect it. Sometimes that's the influencer. You also want to ask yourself, where do people gather in your community if you're having a hard time kind of pinpointing different segments? What I recommend is, rather than trying to take every segment of your community, these top groups here, really focus on 2 or 3 segments that are the most influential, where you think you're going to get the most impact. And really hone in on those, and that's where you should begin. You don't have to try and do everything at once. You're going to burn out quickly if you do it that way. We definitely tried that in some of our communities with neighbor to neighbor, and those were definitely the communities that fizzled out quickly, and we lost volunteers very easily that way as well. You kind of want to take it bit by bit, focus on where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. And then the other things you want to think about is, what are your hurdles? What are your obstacles to achieving your goals? And it seems like from a lot of you, it's getting volunteers and the bodies to do this outreach. And that really is, across the board, one of the biggest hurdles you're going to find. So we can talk a little bit about that when we do some sharing at the end and open it up for discussion. Some other things that people do find is, they do a really great job with a home energy solutions campaign, and that's kind of where it ends. How do they move past those early adopters, the first people to take part in these things? And sometimes if you're hosting events, some communities, it's really hard to get turnout, to get people interested in what you're talking about and wanting to come spend time with you and connect around these issues in your community. So that, sometimes is a challenge for people too. So one of the things we learned with Neighbor to Neighbor, again, it was a pilot. We did a lot of trial and error. In the first 2 years of our program, actually, I guess first year of the program, we did a lot of canvassing, door to door, signing people up for home energy solution. And we kind of took this approach at first that, it's just like a walking tabling event, where it'd be like going to town hall or and setting up a table at the farmer's market. And you're just giving your simple pitch, and people know who you are, and they're going to sign up. Canvassing a little different. It's a little more invasive in a lot of ways. You're going into their home, and you're meeting them at their home. So we saw similar sign-ups initially, comparing tabling events to canvassing per staff hour. So at first we thought this is just as good of an opportunity as tabling. But then when the data came in, we were able to see that we had far less people actually complete the home energy solution sign up. So what we ended up doing is we ended up creating this multi-touch campaign where instead of just being, we're out canvassing for the day, we made it a neighborhood-wide campaign. So what we would do is we would have a letter from the town going out to people in just those few neighborhoods. And we would, then follow up by going door to door. We would also have an opportunity in the next week to invite them to a workshop or a house party or some other event that's going to also pique their interest if they're not ready right away to do home energy solutions. And then we followed up with some sort of postcard or leave behind for people we maybe didn't get in contact with. And then depending on your community, you can do other visibility. So we had yard signs. We had stuff in, if it was a little closer to some of the businesses, we would have flyers up in the businesses. Again, creating that we see you everywhere feel. And we really wanted to time this in a way that people didn't forget about us. People need to be touched multiple times before they're ready to act often. And so you don't want them to kind of forget who you are, and then you come back into their life and they think, who is that? Yeah, I think I've heard of that. You want to avoid that as much as possible. So we really structured this outreach here, the neighborhood campaign, so that there was every week they were getting something for about a month so that they didn't forget about us. And sometimes it was multiple touches in 1 week, which was also really successful. And what we saw actually when we implemented these changes is we saw an increase in our complete rates from canvassing. And they actually ended up being greater than our tabling complete rates. So this proves that multi-touch really does make a difference. The other thing we wish we had known is we started off in November of 2010, and we had pledge cards. We were asking everyone to pledge to save energy. But underneath all of that, our actual goal was getting people to do insulation upgrades in their home. And so it's really hard. We were kind of afraid to make that initial ask, and sometimes that can be kind of scary, asking people for what you really want. But we weren't asking them that, and we were surprised to see that people weren't going on from signing a pledge to doing the action we really wanted them to do deep down. So what we ended up doing very shortly after that, and just about a month later, is we went out and we started talking to people about home energy solutions as a gateway to deeper energy savings with insulation upgrades. So we were being really upfront about what it was we were looking to do and what we wanted people to do. And we saw a much better program and success, and people were much clearer on what we were trying to do and what we were about. Don't be afraid to ask for what you really want. So sometimes, educational pieces are great, and sometimes that's your goal. Maybe that is your upfront goal. You want to educate students. But sometimes that actually can be part of your multi-touch campaign to get you to what you really want, which is maybe clean energy option signups or solar signups. So think about how you can incorporate some of those softer asks into what you're really looking to do and really wanting people to do. And again, don't be afraid to ask for what you really want them to do. It's not as scary as it seems, I promise. It works really well, and you're going to feel a lot better about it overall. Okay. Computer's freezing here. There we go. One of the other things, okay, here we go. One of the other things we learned is that people, again, this is the multi-touch component, is that people have different motivations for taking action in these programs that you're asking them to do. So what we did is we had a lot of discussions with people in these different segments, 7 points of the community, and we're asking them kind of what motivated them to act. On the backside, we're also having someone do some behavioral research on that, so that helped kind of solidify some of what we were hearing in the field a little bit more as well. But what we discovered was people are motivated by different things. So oftentimes, people, are motivated by the future generations, or saving money, or being more comfortable in their home, or being good stewards of the earth. And so really thinking about who is your target audience that you're going to be addressing. And again, working through those different channels is going to help you kind of hone in on your ask a little bit more and your motivation for people. And again, that's working through your trusted sources or your influencers in each of these channels. And again, repeating the message. So, you may not be all that motivated by a faith-based message, but you're really motivated by future generations message, where you're going to hear about the program initially in the church, but then you'll be ready to sign up when you hear a message that resonates with you with the PTO. So giving people multiple opportunities to sign up also helps a lot. And there are definitely times when we started off with to save money, save money, save money as our pitch in our campaign with Neighbor to Neighbor, and we just found that that wasn't motivating everyone. It motivated a small segment, but it wasn't really reaching everyone. So we definitely had to mix it up a little bit. And once we did that, we saw a much greater success, and people were much more receptive to having us there, talking to them. And so one of the other things we did learn was, we did have this big grant, and we were going to try all this great, fun, flashy stuff. And what we discovered was this does not drive outreach at all. We had an online dashboard that only the task force members used in our town, and one or two individuals. We gave away free light bulbs. We had fancy, glossy materials. But at the end of the day, what really worked in generating signups and helping us achieve our goal was the relationships, the one-on-one FaceTime with people, explaining the program, testimonials, talking about our own experiences or experiences of others we knew about in that community. And working through the trusted sources and the multi-touch campaign. At the end of the day, that's what really matters. And I'm telling you this because many task forces have zero budget, and they often think this is impossible for me to do. Solarize is on a shoestring budget, and a lot of you are running Solarize campaigns this fall. And really, it's not the materials that's going to get you to your goal. What you need is to build relationships and work through trusted sources. That's where you're going to see success. That's where you're going to really help you achieve your goal. So oftentimes, towns think, okay, I've done it all. We have so many people in town have done home energy solutions, and we're good, and we've already done it, and there's nothing more that can be done. Well, there's always more that can be done, and here's two stories from our experience with Neighbor to Neighbor that proves that that's the case. In 2010, Cheshire had an 11% penetration rate for home energy solutions. They were the highest in the state when we began. And every event we held there, we were still able to generate a lot of leads. But then the task force decided that they were really ready to focus on the what's next, the next step. And they used a multi-touch campaign with email communication, working through trusted sources, the library, having a press release in the newspaper. And they ended up getting 80 people to turn out to this workshop on energy upgrades, on insulation. So there's always more that can be done. And when you think you've tapped out a crowd, what's the next step? What's the next level? What more can you do? Your work's not done. And then the other town that had a really interesting story was the town of Mansfield. Again, upon beginning Neighbor to Neighbor in 2010, they had 26 installed residential solar units. Again, the highest in the state. And with Solarize and working with the multi-touch campaign, they were actually able to get over 65 new contracts signed. So again, this is possible as long as you're really thinking strategically about your community and what the next steps are for your town. So one of the tools we used, and there are many, many ways to do this, you don't have to use this exactly, is what we call the campaign plan, which is kind of a calendar of sorts, where we were able to think through everything that needed to be done in a week to manage a multi-touch campaign to get us to our goals. So what I'm going to do here is pull open a sample one. If it'll let me, computer. I don't know how to do this. There we go. Okay, sample campaign plan. And we're going to walk through this a little bit. just kind of a month, and I'll show you how we used it. Again, there are many ways to do this. Google Calendar is a really great way to do this. Outlook Calendar is a great way to manage this. But this is something that is easy to share with all members of your group if you're looking to run a multi-touch campaign. So let's say, really basically, that your town only has faith communities and schools, and an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school, and that's it. And you want to get people to do solar in your community. So to make the numbers easy, we're going to say we want 100 solar installs, or let's say 20 solar installs. Let's make it easier. So one of the things we know, right here is our goals. One of the things we know is that you can expect about 20% of people who sign up and be interested in solar to actually install it, just due to roof reasons, cost, the shading, kind of all of that stuff, and sometimes just the timing of it all, selling their house and whatnot. So let's assume 100 people say they're interested. Well, from there, we'll know that we'll get our 20 installs. And let's say you need like 40 volunteers to help you get there. For HES Complete, you probably want to have, let's say 40, because some people aren't going to be eligible for solar, but they might be interested in doing home energy solutions. But you need home energy solutions to install solar and have access to the rebates. And we see about a 50% complete rate there with neighbor to neighbor. So we'll put in, we get 80 people who are signing up, and about 40 of them do it. Okay, so from there, we have our goal set for the quarter. And what we would do is we would come through here and we'd say, okay, well, St. Mary's is the biggest institution in town, so we'll do 10 there. As you see, you can kind of do like 10, let's see, 10 solar, and 1 volunteer, if you know that there's like a volunteer group or something like that there. And what you would do is you'd plug out where you would do that. So you would start by doing outreach. You would put in, actually, hold on, I'm putting this in the wrong spot. You would put in here, letter in the bulletin. And then you would do after service tabling. Okay. And then you would associate goals with each of these events. So realistically, you might get 2 solar signups from this. After service tabling, you might get 8 solar signups because you're actually interfacing with people and talking to them. And you probably get 1 volunteer. And so then what you would do is, what I like to do anyway, is I bold the events and then I pull them up here. Control-C. There we go. Okay. So you would put it up here, and then you keep track of your events this way. And you then are able to kind of stack all of these types of events on top of each other. And basically, what all of your stuff should be adding up to what's here. And this is a really great way to then put, present to PTO. And then you keep track of all the things you need to be doing in a week, in any given week. So you can say, okay, this week we're actually going to be calling St. Mary's Church, and we're going to be presenting to the PTO. The next week you need to be preparing for your presentation to the middle school, as well as making sure you get a letter into the bulletin for St. Mary's. And they kind of build on each other that way. So each week you're on top of everything that needs to be happening. You're also able to assign tasks to people this way. So you can put people's initials in there, and then people know they have a deadline, and they know what needs to be done that week, and when it needs to be done and why, because it all builds off of each other. So if something doesn't get done in 1 week, you have to push the whole campaign back. So it's a way to kind of build in a little bit of accountability with some of that. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is we're going to pass it back to all of you and think about how you can apply this to your work. So think about the campaigns you're working on. How might you structure a multi-touch approach to reaching your goal that you have set out for yourself as a group? And then think about, what are some of the obstacles you're encountering? What are some solutions others have tried? So what I'm going to do, if you all could raise your hand if you want to maybe throw out an idea or a goal you're trying to achieve, and you could use other people's advice. And we'll also use the chat function at the bottom where you can type your message to everyone that way as well. Okay, so is anyone in particular working on a solar or solarized campaign that would like to get some advice from others? Okay. What about home energy solutions? Does anyone have any questions about multi-touch campaigns and what that actually looks like? Or any issues or obstacles you're encountering that you would like someone's advice on? There aren't that many attendees, so please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions of me or participants. And I'll be sure to make sure that everyone can hear that. Here we go. First question. Okay. And let me take you off mute here, Rich. Go ahead, Rich. Did you have a question, Rich? I'm going to put Rich back on mute. Okay. John Hall says he doesn't have a question, but he thinks that the action grids and plans seem very useful. Absolutely. And I'm going to send those around afterwards. That way everyone can see them and use them for themselves. And if you have any questions about how to use it or plan stuff out, or you want, just does this look right, please feel free to email it back to me at any point. I'm happy to help with that and just take an eye at it. With Neighbor to Neighbor, we used it quarterly, but sometimes it might make sense, depending on your goal and your time frame, to do it monthly or however long that makes the most sense for you. Okay. So, yes, Bernard from West Hartford, they're brand new to all of this, and they don't have their solar ambassadors lined up. So does anyone have any suggestions on how to get some volunteers in the door and how to get them to think about multi-touch? I mean, I have an answer for that, but I think the collective wisdom in the group could be pretty helpful on that too. Well, I'll answer that for you, Bernard. So one of the things you can do is if you have access to the list of people in town who have done solar, that's really a great place to start. Another option that some of the towns did, Mansfield, for example, didn't actually have a lot of volunteers working on the Solarize campaign. So they took that list, but they also did in a press release in a local newspaper about the Solarize campaign, and thought a little bit about, asked for volunteers, people who wanted to help reach out to that. So depending on your community, those are things you might want to think about. If you don't have a list of other people who have installed solar on their roof, I believe you can get that list from someone at Cephia, and they can help you think through that list and reach out to everyone there. And then if you, yeah, John Hall has some great stuff. He helped with Portland. And then if you multi-touch, go ahead and you feel free to use these resources I'm giving to you, and then you're able to really help. People can use that, and really you're going to probably have to help guide them through some of the multi-touch on that. So let me actually see. Yes, you do have a list. That's wonderful. Okay. So John Hall also suggested contact people who already have solar, and ask people who are interested to help spread the word. And really, again, this goes back to the trusted sources. This is why the solar ambassadors are so helpful, is it's the trusted source, it's testimonials, it's real people in their community. It's not some gimmick. It's a real person who has done solar and has seen the benefits and can speak to it. So that's really powerful for people, and that's one of the biggest reasons solar ambassadors are so important. Any other questions or pieces of advice you would like from others? Okay. John, that's a great question. John Hall asked, what are some of the insights that came out of the workshop in Portland that he missed? You know, we honestly, in both small business outreach and residential outreach, we talked a lot about multi-touch campaigns. And we we really, people found that, you know, people were able to interact and ask some questions on specifics. So, you know, how do you run a solarized campaign? People were able to ask Andy and Lou Pear and kind of pick their brain. You know, what are the right questions to ask when you're doing certain sort of outreach with contractors, that sort of stuff. But really, overall, I mean, this is the takeaway: is multi-touch campaigns really work, and that's how you're going to be the most successful. We do have some information, John, that we can send around. I believe Justin and Roger were planning on sending out to everyone, which was some of the resources that people said they wanted made available to them as well. So that's also a resource to you, and I can send that to you if you haven't received that. Okay. Yes. So Bernard says we were advised to focus on just solar and not go combined HESS and solar. Do I agree? So that's one of the things we tested in Mansfield and Windham. And I think the way to combine efficiency with solar that works is getting a really great solar contractor who's going to promote efficiency for you. So it is better to have one ask as to not confuse people. I think when we did do a few direct mail pieces out from towns and town officials to all residents that had multi-asks, and people were very confused. So, but what did work is the solar installer they used when people weren't eligible for solar, that's when they promoted home energy solutions and energy upgrades and said, there's still more you can do even if you can't do solar or aren't ready to do solar. And that actually worked really well. It did require a little bit more volunteer work on our end because we had to then call everyone who was deemed a lost project or not eligible for solar and then pitch it again to sign them up. So if that's something that's really important to you, that might be something to incorporate into your interviews with the solar installers. Does anyone else have any other feedback on how to do that? Yeah, and Kate Donnelly, who works for Smart Power, actually was a clean water organizer on Neighbor to Neighbor. So anything she's telling you, she has experience with a multi-touch campaign in all of this. So definitely work very closely with them. They're a wonderful team over there, the Solarized team. Okay, who asked this question? John Hall asked me what I know about the CT Solar Challenge program that is not CEFIA-based. Does it avoid paperwork or so that program is run by one solar company, and it's really great in that it gets a lot of interest. But again, one of the things we learned with Solarize is that many companies are not prepared for the volume that comes through and the interest that comes through in these communities. And the fact that it is one company that has multiple towns, it's all a bit of a lag. So they stretched it out. Instead of just doing 3 or 4 month campaign like you would in Solarize, it was a 6-month campaign. And I think you lose a little bit of the urgency there when you do that. So if you are planning on doing the CT Solar Challenge, you don't have to run an RFP usually because you're working with that company. But you might want to ask them about bringing in additional vendors to help lighten the load a little bit on that. It's pretty much the same program now where they do tiered pricing and they hold workshops and have solar ambassadors and volunteers. So it's a very similar structure and uses a lot of similar approaches and best practices that they've learned from Solarize, but it's just with that one vendor. Okay. Yes. So John also asked, can't Solarize CT now avoid an RFP? Yeah, so that's one of the things that they are testing with Solarize. It's a pilot, and they're trying to figure out what is the success to Solarize. Is it the one installer that's approved by town? Is it the tiered pricing? Is it the time frame? So one of the things they're running this next quarter here is they're doing Express and Choice. So Solarize Express is shortened. It's not as long. And Choice is multiple vendors that each town works with. And those avoid an RFP. So that also helps kind of speed up the process a little bit for you and your town. But you do need to act quickly if you are interested in doing that because they are running out of room in both of those programs. So if you're interested, contact Kate Donnelly at Smart Power for that. I can give you her contact information if you don't have that. Bernard, can you expand upon your question? You asked, do you see a difference in marketing to purchaser? Purchase versus leasing people. I see what you're saying. Yes and no. I think many people see the price tag on solar and tend to think it's not for me. But Solarize, the way they pitch it together, affordable, simple, is it kind of gets people who maybe wouldn't think that they were eligible for solar or able to afford solar interested. So once you have them interested, you can talk to them about the 2 different options they have. That's usually how it's worked. And Wyndham actually did see some solar leases signed. Their motivations are usually pretty similar. I think just it's kind of similar to how we would market an energy upgrade. You can finance it, or you can purchase it, or outright. So the marketing's not that different. It's just when you have them, talking to them about their options. If they say, oh, I can't afford that, or I can't do that, let them know that leasing is an option. That's often how people get interested in that and are able to still do it anyway. You're welcome. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Huh. Do people ever serve as ambassadors in towns other than their own? You know, I don't know of a time when that was true, but I don't see why they couldn't. I think one thing that people in Connecticut, I've noticed, sometimes have a sense of loyalty to their community. And so it may not be as exciting for people in West Hartford if they are talking to someone from Avon who's done it. Sometimes if it's someone who is well known in that community, it can work, I'm sure, or someone who works in that community or has some sort of connection to that community. I feel like in that instance it would work. But I've never known it to be even something someone was considering. So if you have a good person in mind, it would be worth testing. I think that could work, and that could be interesting. John, were you involved in the Solarize Portland at all? Do you have an answer for that? John doesn't live in Portland, but he's often active with that group. So. Okay. One of the suggestions Bernard had was that he was thinking it would be really cool to have someone come in from another town who's already done it to talk to the new solar ambassadors who are kind of fresh and new to all of this, like from Canton or something like that. That could be interesting. Yes. So John says that he lives in Portland and works in Middletown. But all ambassadors in Portland were from Portland. So, and I think that was the case from Mansfield-Wyndham as well. So, but I think that would be a great idea to have them at least come talk to the ambassadors. So having someone from Avon who just did Solarize could be, or Canton, sorry, would be pretty helpful and might be a good way to kind of get people excited, your new ambassadors excited. That's a great idea. Ambassador to ambassador. I like that. Bernard says it's a version of neighbor to neighbor, ambassador to ambassador. That's absolutely true. I think you're using testimonials to spread the word and get people excited, and that's what neighbor to neighbor was all about. So that would be a great idea and a great way to get people excited. Is there anyone who's not thinking they want to do anything Solarize related or solar related? Maybe a different type of campaign? Someone had mentioned wanting to run a media campaign. I don't know if that person has joined us this evening. I think one thing to think about if you are thinking of running a home energy solutions specific campaign is ask yourself if that's really your end goal, or if you're interested in getting people to do the deeper energy savings with home energy solutions, natural conversion to natural gas, all of that, and be thinking about how to tailor and prime people with home energy solutions when they're signing up for that, for what you really want them to do. Patch does count as media, yes. The patch is actually probably one of the easiest media sources to work with in that you create your own login and you submit content that way. You're more likely to get picked up. And people often, depending on your community, look at that more frequently to see if, like what events are happening. So that is a great way to spread the word in your community. And generally, this is a little off topic, but with media, one thing that we learned with Neighbor to Neighbor was either finding that one reporter who was really excited about energy efficiency and would write about us all the time, or really thinking strategically about how is this story different, especially with Solarize, or if you're going to be doing something that's kind of ongoing and there's events going to be happening all the time. How do you keep it fresh, new, different, interesting? And sometimes, that involves working with the different media sources and sending them kind of different content so that it reaches different member bases. Because sometimes not everyone reads the Hartford Current, for example, but maybe, a different segment reads the patch. So kind of mixing up where you're sending the stories a little bit. That's one thing we learned with Mansfield-Wyndham, as well as in Westport, too. and I'm sure in Portland. Okay. I like that idea, John. John Hall suggests getting HES ambassadors for the HES campaign that are running in Middletown. That's very similar to what we did at Neighbor to Neighbor. We had testimonial boards with people kind of sharing their stories. That I think having people who've done this actually, at events, signing people up who are excited about their experience, that's going to get other people excited. So that's a great idea, and that's a great way to get new volunteers into your group and energizing the group as a whole. Okay, any other questions we have? Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions or ideas or suggestions anyone wants to make, but or you haven't really quite formulated what you want to say, please feel free to email either Justin, Roger, or myself. We'd be happy to answer that for you if it comes up at any point. Or if you are, struggling, or you feel like you're hitting a roadblock, or you just want someone to kind of look over what you have, please feel free to send us an email, give us a call. We'd be happy to help you out and guide you through any hurdles you may be having, or connect you to anyone else who has had similar experience and worked through similar issues before. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Again, please feel free to reach out, and thank you again for joining us. Have a good night.